Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining this webinar about the Draft Wildfire and Landscape Resilience Action Plan with a focus on the Sierra Nevada. Over the next hour and 15 minutes, you can expect to learn about key components of the draft action plan, including the framework for mobilizing regional action, ask task force staff questions about the action plan and the process for submitting comments about it, and hear directly from partners who are working to advance wildfire resilience in the Sierra Nevada. I'm seeing a chat message that there's a big echo. Can anyone else confirm that that is also happening for them? I'm going to continue then. Thanks. In addition to hearing directly from partners who are working to advance wildfire resilience in the Sierra Nevada, however, today's webinar will not cover detailed specifics about any funding opportunities or programs. Today's agenda will, we are using the Zoom webinar platform today, and we ask that you use the Zoom chat to communicate any technical issues to hosts and panelists. Use the Q&A function of the webinar to ask questions to hosts or speakers at any time. And during the Q&A time on the agenda, the raise hand function may be used and you will be called on to ask your question out loud. A recording of the webinar will be made available at wildfiretaskforce.org. We will start today's webinar with a presentation by the Governor's Wildfire and Forest Resilience Task Force Director, Patrick Wright, who will provide an overview of the task force, the action plan, and the framework for mobilizing regional action. This will be followed by an initial time for questions from the audience. Then we will hear from two speakers working in the Sierra Nevada to advance wildfire and landscape resilience, followed by a second Q&A session with all the panelists. Finally, we will go over how to review and provide input on the draft plan and how to stay connected with the task force's work. Let's jump in, and I will pass the mic to Patrick Wright, Director of the Governor's Wildfire and Forest Resilience Task Force.
Thank you, Madeline. I'm going to walk you through a short presentation. This is a modified version of the presentation we gave at the last task force meeting, so maybe a little bit of a repeat for some of you, but certainly we'd be happy to go into more detail in the Q&A period. Next slide. For those of you who are new to the task force, the most recent sort of iteration of the task force started up about 5 years ago when we announced the state's first Wildfire and Forest Resilience Action Plan to really provide, for the first time, a comprehensive look at all the activities underway at the state and federal level with respect to wildfire resilience. We have an executive committee that's made up of a variety of state, federal, local, and tribal leaders in our effort to really try to make sure that we're addressing this issue at all levels of government. Next slide. And again, we've got a whole range of work groups that many of you are involved in. We have an interagency staff, we have a science advisory panel, and we have a planning integration team made up, again, of a large variety of agencies that are involved. Again, a key focus and priority of the task force is to try to align the work of federal, state, local, tribal, and private entities throughout the state. We get a lot of our important work done through our regional meetings. We alternate between Sacramento and the region. We have 2 in Sacramento per year and 2 in the region. We recently came off a very successful March meeting in Jamestown, and we'll be heading up to Fortuna on the North Coast in October. So encourage all of you to attend either in person or online. It's our first meeting after all these years in the North Coast, so we're expecting a lot from that meeting. We've accomplished a lot. This is just one slide because I know people are eager to get onto the action plan. But as I said before, we spent a lot of time trying to coordinate and align more than $6 billion in federal and state investments total. We've ramped up treatments to over 700,000 acres a year, including a doubling of prescribed fire. We've just been through a very successful streamlined permitting process where More than 440 projects have been approved literally in 30 days through our interagency process. The Department of Conservation, through its Regional Fire and Forest Capacity Program, has spent well over $100 million in building regional capacity across the state. We continue to move forward on a broad range of interagency strategies on everything from recreation to prescribed fire to private landowner assistance. We hope to have a new reforestation strategy out for circulation very soon as well. And then a wide range of new data and tools. We've got an interagency treatment dashboard where you can go online and you can see all of the projects that have been funded at the state and federal levels for the past 5 or 6 years, and they're all sorted by agency and by treatment type. So a lot has been underway during the last 5 years. And that sets us up well for our update. We're required to update our action plan every 5 years. We've been working for quite a while, since roughly a year ago, to try to update the 2021 plan using the great work of our stakeholders and our work groups. But we have a strong foundation, as the next slide suggests. We've learned a lot in the last 5 years. There was a lot of questions at the time about what types of projects work and don't work. Are fuel breaks effective? Should we be focused more on prescribed fire or thinning? What about home hardening, defensible space? So we commissioned our science advisory panel to put together a science consensus document that is online that we announced to get together with the draft that has the latest findings on it, on the effectiveness of the great work that's underway. And secondly, as I said before, we spent a lot of time building capacity throughout the state. Certainly the Sierra Nevada Conservancy has been a big part of that, as you'll hear soon. Streamlined processes and data and science. So we feel like we're in a really good position to take the whole program to the next level, given the foundation that we've built. We've divided the plan into 3 major segments: a landscape strategy, community strategy, and a framework for mobilizing regional action. Obviously, these overlap quite a bit, but they also have distinct differences that I'll briefly walk through. Starting with the landscape strategy, key priorities here are really having a laser focus on high hazard and dense landscapes throughout the state. We get our biggest bang for the buck there. To complete a comprehensive fuel break network that links federal projects with private projects and state projects, and to give renewed attention to recently burned areas that have experienced high severity fire. It's been a real wake-up call for us to better understand the enormous impacts that some of these large fires have had, particularly in areas that aren't going to be regenerating on their own. It's going to be quite a large effort to try to restore those areas. So those are the pillars of the strategy. The next couple slides go through some of them individually. Again, some of the modeling and data we have shows that if we focus on the high and very high hazard parcels, we get up to a 3 times greater reduction in later high severity fire. So a lot of modeling and a lot of scientific literature that supports the fact that we ought to continue to prioritize well. In Southern California, the name of the game is all about reducing ignitions, particularly around roadways and utility lines. Another key finding on the forest health side is, as important as it is to get done a lot of thinning and prescribed fire to improve wildfire resilience, we need to do a lot of that same work, not just to reduce fire hazard, but to improve forest health, to increase resilience to drought and insects, particularly as we're dealing with a warming climate. So you'll see in the plan, yes, there's a big emphasis on wildfire resilience, but when we're dealing with forest health, we're constantly reminded that it's a larger issue than just wildfire. We have to worry about lots of other disturbances that are affecting the health of our forests. Next slide speaks to some of the importance of fuel breaks. We've done a fair amount of modeling on fuel break network. 2 of the major conclusions is they really do need to be linked. Fuel breaks don't work very well, obviously, if they're disconnected. And secondly, they can be very effective if they're linked with suppression efforts. That's the real benefit of fuel breaks. It's not so much in stopping fires as much as it is giving firefighters places to make a stand. And we've got a growing body of literature that demonstrates that. And then finally, again, on reforestation, huge areas of the Sierra and the North Coast have burned at high severity. So we've got a tremendous backlog. Looking ahead, we're also projecting up to 2 million acres could burn in the next decade or so. So we've got a lot of work to do to try to avoid losing a good part of the Sierra, a good part of the Sierra's forest. So to wrap it all up, the key to resilient landscapes in Northern California and the Sierra is we've got to get those fuel break networks in place, not only to help fight fires, but also to provide boundaries known as pods to support prescribed fire and manage fire. Again, to be laser focused on high hazard areas wherever possible, near communities and in the wildlands, to continue to reduce the density of our forests, not just for wildfire, but forest health, to reforest our large high severity patches throughout the Sierra and the North, and to reestablish beneficial fire regimes. This next slide just sort of presents some of the same information in a different way. If we can begin to really prioritize those high hazard areas, build that pod network, address the restoration backlog, our estimate is that if we can do that at roughly 1 million acres over the next 10 years, we can then go into maintenance mode, where we use primarily prescribed fire at scale to maintain the health and resilience of the state's forest, and then focus our efforts on restoring newly burned areas if we can manage to address most of the backlog during those next 10 years. So that's the sum of the resilience strategy, a 10-year period to ramp up in each of those areas to put us in a position of having resilient forests that can be maintained through, again, primarily prescribed fire. Turning next to, and then of course, to get that work done, it's not a matter of just doing thinning and beneficial fire, but we need to pay attention to chaparral and shrublands in Southern California. We've got to work harder with private landowners who own 40% of the forest land in the state. We have large sustainable recreation, reforestation, state lands, wood utilization, and workforce and wood utilization programs. In all of these cases, we have interagency teams that are working to develop joint strategies to move each of these forward, recognizing how vital they are to get where we want to be from a forest health perspective. So now turning to the community side, as many of you know, the community side is all about structure protection through Zone 0, defensible space. I think the big change in the draft plan is a strong move towards county-based strategies. We're really going to try to provide incentives for CWPPs and other plans to be done at the county level where they can be integrated with related county programs. Continued focus on roadways and utilities. We've got a wonderful program in Southern California where the Forest Service, Caltrans, and utilities are working together. We hope to expand that to the rest of the state, and then continue working on data and standards and statewide targets. Let's just flip through a couple of these next slides, and then we can, I think I've already summarized where we are on the community side, and then we'll move on to our regional resilience strategy. This is an area where we're really aiming to try to align our efforts regionally to see if we can get the various agencies, Forest Service, state parks, CAL FIRE, conservancies, all preparing joint plans, streamlining permitting, working together to work across boundaries, and reporting through outcome-based measures. So the way we launched this, next slide, is to think about on the landscape side, we've got the Department of Conservation in the lead for developing regional priority plans up and down the state, where we hope to capture all of the landscape health projects of the various agencies. And then, as I said before, on the community side, to really look at county level plans that will be overseen by CAL FIRE. So you're really going to see over time much more attention to these two networks, a county-based network for community work, and then an RFFC-based network for landscape work, Yes, there will be overlap. Yes, we'll have to work in making sure that they're coordinated, but that's the way the stars seem to be aligning right now. The next slide gives you sort of example of kind of where we are now and where we're headed. This is a slide from Southern California that shows what I would call sort of the old way of doing business, which is funding dozens and dozens, if not hundreds of projects. The good news is these projects are hitting our high priority landscapes. The bad news is it means thousands of grant applications, thousands of individual crews, permits, workforce needs, et cetera. So we have been tracking on this level. And as I said before, with the next slide, we have some good data that shows our forest health grants are hitting high priority landscapes. PPIC did analysis that shows that 84% of our projects have been hitting these high priority areas. So that's good news. The bad news is it doesn't allow us to scale in the way that we want to scale. So the next slide gives you a flavor from Southern California of the wave of the future, which is block grants. In this case, a $10 million grant that drew from both CAL FIRE Forest Health and fire prevention that led to 6 sub-regional grants over 23 sites involving 20 partners. So again, the whole movement is going to be shifting from grants for individual projects to block grants for interagency plans and bundles of projects over the next several years. Key advantage of that approach is it allows us to better evaluate the benefits of our projects collectively. Very hard to do that with individual projects. Again, this is a slide from Southern California that shows the potential change in burn probability by dealing with a variety of projects along roadways, in particular in Southern California. Just a flavor of where we're going with our outcome-based metrics. Again, this is not just an idea, it's a concept of regional grants. It's well underway. CAL FIRE, Sierra Nevada Conservancy, and DOC are all moving rapidly to move towards landscape grants at a large scale to help fulfill this new approach and new vision. Next question, of course, is, well, what boundaries are we going to use for these regional plans? So we spent a lot of time with the Forest Service and various agencies trying to figure out the best way at least to evaluate the progress that's being made and to plan for the future. So we divided our 4 regions in ways that seem to work, as you can see with the Forest Service forest, at least to some extent here. Then the next slide shows you at least some initial attempt on the left. Those are the RFFC subregions, including the Sierra Nevada as a whole. And then the slide on the right is sort of a further division that we're leaning towards at this point as part of our draft to allow us a statewide network where for each of those roughly 15 regions, we can summarize all the planned projects that are underway, estimate their benefits, and then look forward through joint 5-year plans and develop the cost and benefits for those, and then to be able to roll up that information statewide. So that's the vision moving forward, is to be able to cover the entire state with a comprehensive network. We understand that these boundaries don't fit exactly the boundaries of various collaboratives and other approaches, and so we will certainly be working with folks. We don't intend to force any of the collaboratives to change their boundaries. It's just a way to have to enable a statewide tracking system. Again, to kind of summarize all this, we're moving towards interagency, regional, and county-based plans of work. We're going to increasingly focus on high hazard and dense landscapes wherever possible, particularly in Northern California, move rapidly away from individual grants to block grants. We're going to continue pushing alternatives that are now in legislation for a one-stop shop for permitting. We're going to continue to push Good Neighbor and other authorities to enable regional partnerships to get projects done on the ground. And again, we're going to continue shifting from acres treated to outcome-based measures to evaluate our progress. So I hope that gives you at least somewhat of a flavor of where we're headed. I think that was the last slide, if I'm not correct. And certainly happy to answer initial questions now and certainly following the next presentation.
Thanks, Patrick. That was a great overview of the different components of the plan. We do have time now on the agenda for some audience question and answer with Patrick Wright about the task force and the action plan draft. Noting that we are about to transition to a more regionally specific conversation. And so any questions, again, about high level, the principles, the objectives about the plan that come to mind, we can take questions from the audience using the question and answer feature on Zoom. And I believe we are also set up for people to use the raise hand function, and we will call on you to unmute yourself and ask your question directly. We'll give people a moment to compose their questions. I'm seeing a question coming in the chat that from an anonymous attendee that's maybe inviting Patrick a little bit more discussion or thought about outcome-based measures and why they're just reminding people what they are, but also why they're an important evolution and part of the direction of the plans, where the plan's headed.
Sure. I mean, we and other states have gotten a lot of feedback, of course, that we need to start moving beyond acres treated as our primary measure. As many of you know, acres treated doesn't really tell you much in terms of either the effectiveness of projects or the benefits that we're getting. So we've been working closely with the team at the Forest Service. There is a set of roughly 20 new outcome-based measures that are in the draft plan. Things like tree density and probability of high severity fire, various metrics of forest health, various metrics of wildfire resilience. We're going to continue to be working with the Forest Service over the next several weeks and months to try to further refine them. There's also an effort underway among the Western states to do the same thing. A lot of us have a concern that every area of the state and different states are all going to be measuring the benefits of their projects differently, measuring fire risk differently, measuring forest health differently, measuring water benefits differently. So there's a big effort to see if we can, at least to some extent, standardize those metrics of success across the Western states and with the Forest Service so that we can compare apples to apples and oranges to oranges across the state and across the West. So just the beginning of that process right now. We've got some initial outcome-based measures that are already in the draft plan, but certainly a long way to go.
Great, thanks, Patrick. Is there anyone, I'm not sure if I'm able to see, but is there anyone who would like to raise their hand and come off mute to ask a question? There's a question in the Q&A section about major success stories in the Sierra, and that will, I think, be a great question to circle back to at the end of today's presentation.
Okay, I think we're ready for our next, oh, we got one here.
Great. Well, this is not your only chance to ask questions. We will have another block at the end.
Maddie, we do have a few raised hands. I was just allowing them to talk.
Oh, great. When you do ask your question, please state your name, if you have a relevant organizational affiliation, and then your question. Skye, do you want to call on the first person?
Sounds good. Carrie, I believe I just allowed you to talk if you can ask your question.
Thank you so much. My name is Carrie Monahan. I'm the Director of Natural Resources for Moortown Rancheria, a federally recognized tribe in Northern California. And we do large fuels reduction projects on federal lands, as well as some prescribed fire. And I'm curious, this is an amazing framework that's being created. And I'm wondering how tribes will be included in the framework, specifically in a way that honors their trust responsibility with the federal government that the federal government has with them and their current agreements that they have with federal partners? Thank you.
Sure, that's a great question. So we try to involve, no, we don't try. We do involve tribes in every aspect of what the task force is doing. We're actually involved. We've already had several consultations on the draft plan itself. And then regionally, we certainly have the expectation that these regional networks of both community-based plans and landscape-based plans will include tribal priorities and tribal projects. And certainly some of the guidance that's going to be going out in the future for these plans will make that certainly a priority. We also, as I said before, have a number of interagency strategies for things like prescribed fire and reforestation, through which we've received quite a bit of tribal involvement as well. So we're absolutely committed to making sure that tribes are a key partner as we move forward. So thanks for the question.
Guy, do we want to call on the next raised hand?
Yeah, I'm just allowing Rich Farrington, if you can ask your question. And we can give Rich a sec. I'm going to go on to the Biochar Coalition raise their hand. So we'll go to the Biochar Coalition, then we can go back to Rich.
Greetings. Thank you so much for having us all here today. My question is, as the task force moves towards interagency regional plans, county-based strategies, block grants, and larger bundled projects, how do you plan to formally include community-based nonprofits that are already performing outreach, workforce development, biomass utilization, defensible space education, prescribed fire support, biochar, and landowner engagement?
I should have maybe clarified. We're not creating any new regional entities. We're drawing from the regional entities that are already out there. So in terms of developing, through the Regional Forest and Fire Capacity Program at Department of Conservation, that's largely been sort of a bottoms-up program that is providing capacity building money to existing organizations to grow. So we're not proposing new entities. We're proposing to really try to strengthen and give local and regional collaboratives better tools. It used to be that collaboratives, it would take them several years just to evaluate what's the health of their forest, how do we prioritize, how do we report. So we've developed a series of toolkits that we hope will help accelerate that work statewide, so people have access to all the data they need to put together projects much quicker than ever before.
Great. I think we have time for one more question right now.
I'll go back to Rich if he's on. Otherwise, we can come back.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you, Rich. It's a little muted, but we can hear you.
Okay. Thanks, Rich Farrington. I'm the director with the Amber Water Agency and also the Upper McCollum River Watershed Authority. I think, Patrick, I had heard that the funding for wildfire reduction work was reduced $200 million in the state budget from Cap and Trade, I think. Is this correct? And if so, is it likely to be permanent?
So hoping somebody could repeat that who can hear better than I can.
Yeah, I think the question was about recent commitments in the state budget around funding wildfire work generally, if you have any updates and insight into that.
Well, I mean, there's no question that the state's facing severe financial pressures across the board. Many of you read some of the deep cuts that have taken place, also some shifts in where cap and trade money may go. Those are reality that we have to deal with. A lot of very similar pressures on the federal side. It just sort of reemphasizes our need to partner and leverage between state, federal, and local money as much as we can and to better prioritize projects. There will, be a lively discussions through the rest of the legislative session on, the budget that's out there, and we'll just have to see where that goes. But in the meantime, our job is to make sure that we spend whatever dollars we can get as effectively as we can.
Great. Thanks for that answer. And Rich, if we didn't fully capture your question, please feel free to add other parts of it in the chat, and we'll come back. We are next going to move the conversation to taking a little bit more of a focus on the Sierra Nevada region. We are going to be hearing from two speakers who are, in many ways, already mobilizing regional action in the Sierra Nevada in ways that illustrate and align with the draft action plan. First up, we have Sarah Campy, who is a regional scientist with the Sierra Nevada Conservancy.
Thanks, Maddie. Yeah, I'm Sarah. She just introduced me, so we can skip that slide. But really what I want to talk about today is the Task Force Action Plan is this amazing framework for how to think about wildfire resilience across the state. And now I want to put a spotlight on the Sierra Nevada region and the role and sort of how we're approaching that across our giant quarter of the state. I think first it's important to take a step back. And I think that what I'm going to talk about isn't going to be unfamiliar to most of you, but sometimes it's worth just pausing to remember. As most of you are probably remember, about 25 years ago began in 2012 to 2016, we had one of the most severe droughts in California. It was a hot drought. And what that did was it catalyzed a bark beetle epidemic across the state, but really focused on the Sierra. And we lost 150 million trees, some of our largest pines in particular. And again, that was really focused on the Sierra Nevada. And then just a few years later, we had the fires of 2020 and 2021. And again, a statewide sort of catastrophe. But some of those largest fires happened in the Sierra. We had the Dixie Fire, we had the Creek Fire, just massive fires that were burning not only across enormous landscapes, but at really high severity. We were just losing vast amounts of forests. And I think that these events in particular were a wake-up call to just how quickly we could see landscape scale transformation. And all of a sudden that phrase, pace and scale, really took on a new meaning and an urgency to start working at the scale of the problem. Next slide. And, the good news is the state responded. In 2019, the Regional Forest and Fire Capacity Program was created, and that really provided critical support to partners on the ground to build the capacity to get work done at scale. The task force was formed in 2021, and the Sierra Nevada Conservancy responded too. In 2022, we released our landscape investment strategy, and what that was a vision for how to effectively deploy funds at a landscape scale. And then paired with that, we launched our landscape grant pilot program as a proof of concept funding program, and that was awarded to the Healthy El Dorado Landscape Partnership. And now where we are in 2026, it's fine. In 2026 is we have just recently launched our landscape grant program funded by Prop 4 climate bond dollars. And that really, the goal with that program is to really put on the ground the vision articulated in the Task Force Action Plan and start funding programs of work across really large landscapes. Okay, next slide. All right. And I think what's really important to note is that not only did the state and state agencies respond to these catastrophes, but our on-the-ground partners responded too. The Sierra Nevada region is vast, and so unlike other parts of the state, we don't have a single regional priority plan that has all of the projects. Instead, what we have done is really look to how our on-the-ground partners and land management agencies sort of have naturally or organically formed collaborative groups. And so what we have are these landscape scale collaboratives, and those sometimes are, 100,000 acres-ish to sometimes much larger, a million, 1.5 million acres. And sometimes those are jurisdictional boundaries, sometimes they're watershed boundaries, sometimes there's other ways that those groups define that, but those really come from the ground up. And I think are informed by the partner's relationship to these landscapes, to their unique local goals and objectives for their communities and the places where they work and live. Um, and with capacity support, largely through the Regional Forest and Fire Capacity Program, these landscape groups, these collaborative groups, have really gotten to the point that what they are at a place that we call investment ready. They are positioned for landscape scale, large scale investment to work across sometimes hundreds of thousands of acres to implement these portfolio of projects. Next slide. Okay, so I talk about investment ready, but I think it's worth actually digging into what that looks like. So each one of those colored polygons, first of all, has people who are ready to do that work. So what that means is a high capacity collaborative group that has built trust, they have relationships, they have the engagement of major landowners like the Forest Service. Hopefully they have CAL FIRE in the room. We want to see that they've engaged tribes where there is an interest from local tribes and that those cultural priorities are being integrated into that partnership. And what we want to see also is that these partnerships, these investment ready landscapes have a clear process for decision making, that they're able to think about what their goals are and desired conditions for their landscape. And they have a process for collectively deciding priorities, priority projects or programs of work that they want to implement over the next, say, 5 to 10 years. Next slide. Okay, and importantly, each one of those partnerships, each one of those landscapes has a project portfolio, that 5-tier program of work, which is designed to advance resilience at scale. And these portfolios are based on landscape scale assessments. Patrick talked about really honing in on the areas of highest vulnerability or highest fire risk. So each one of these groups has done some sort of assessment to figure out what the conditions are on their landscape, where their highest risk areas are, and where the best opportunities to get work done that is most effective. And I think that these portfolios of work both meet state goals. We all care about not having another Dixie Fire. We all care about preserving old growth habitat and carbon. But these groups are also able to define their local priorities and the local goals that they know for their landscapes and design these projects to meet those locally defined goals and objectives. Next slide. And so then zooming in a little bit closer, I just want to highlight 3 of these partnerships or 3 of these projects. And so on the left, what we have is the Stanislaus National Forest is affiliated with a group called Yosemite Stanislaus Solutions, in partnership with Tuolumne County, is implementing something called the Social and Ecological Resilience Across the Landscape project, better known as the CIRL project. And that's 160,000 acres on Stanislaus National Forest land. But that is done working in conjunction, like I said, with the county, with local groups, with tribes, to identify both, make sure that those priorities are considered in the design of that project. But it also is meant to protect local communities and local assets, not just, although it's happening on National Forest land, all lands are sort of considered in the design of those treatments. Another example, and I think someone had asked a question about success stories, and so these are just 3, but I think these are 3 good ones. In the center, we have something called the West Lassen Headwaters project, I'm sorry. And this is a partnership with a group called the South Austin Watershed Group. It's spearheaded by an NGO called the Sierra Institute. And the intent of this is to implement forest health and resilience projects, again, over a vast landscape. I think it's 172,000 acres. About 100,000 of that is on Lassen National Forest, but that is complemented by work being done on Lassen Volcanic National Park and on private industrial and private non-industrial lands. So really is this all lands approach to thinking about resilience at a watershed scale. And this is treating lands in 4 anadromous watersheds, Antelope, Deer, Battle, and Mill Creek watersheds, which are sort of really critical habitat at the intersection of the Sierra and Cascade ranges. And then finally, on the right, we have the Mokelumne Amador Calaveras Forest Resilience Project, or the MAC project. And this is cool. It's actually a project that spans 2 forests. So it's part of the Stanislaus and part of the El Dorado National Forests. And that is being done in partnership with a collaborative group called the Amador Calaveras Consensus Group. Again, this enables interested parties, tribal partners, communities to really be in the room and have a voice when thinking about how to design these projects and where they're placed. And this treats, or will ultimately treat, I think 250,000 acres across these landscapes. And again, these are just 3 examples, but collaborative groups across the Sierra in partnership with our federal and state land managers, with our local NGO nonprofits, with tribes, are developing projects or these portfolios of projects like these to really meaningfully move the needle towards healthy and resilient forests at a scale that matters not just for these local groups, but really for California writ large. Okay, next slide. And so I think then it's incumbent upon the state, the partners are acting, they're really thinking at scale. How do we as state agencies meet them where they are and start funding that work at scale? And so the Sierra Nevada Conservancy, as I mentioned, this year launched our landscape grant program. And the intent behind this program is to, have the money, provide the money that matches the work that's happening on the ground. Thanks, you're ahead of me. So really what the landscape grant program does that I think matches sort of the vision articulated in the action plan is the intent is to fund these portfolios of work. So first of all, the goal is to fund collaborative groups. Rarely do the groups themselves are a fundable entity, but what SNC is planning to do is fund an entity within that group that then will be distributed through the collaborative, or what we're also open to doing is funding multiple groups within that collaborative to, spread that money out and have multiple organizations working within their area of expertise to get work done on the ground as quickly as possible. And as I noted, the goal is to fund project portfolios. So we'll be looking at, an entire suite of projects across the landscape. And then most of these portfolios are not entirely implementation ready. So often there's, some that are still getting NEPA or CEQA done or still being designed, some that are shovel ready. And so our intent with the landscape grant program is to have more flexibility, that we're really trying to figure out where the money can be most effective, where it can complement other streams of funding to advance projects either across that planning, move it through that planning process, at the same time funding implementation work on the ground. So we'll be working with the collaborative group to figure out where the funding can be most effective given that entire portfolio of work that they've designed. And it's more money. Our intent is to fund, $8 to $12 million grants, which is not enough, but the hope is that money can be leveraged with other streams of funding to really make a meaningful difference on the ground. Next slide. And certainly, I think a lot of focus is on these landscape scale programs of work and landscape grants and really high capacity collaborative groups. But I just want to note that we do recognize that across the Sierra, certainly, and I expect across the state, we have partners that are in different stages on that spectrum of readiness. And some are still trying to build capacity. Some of them are still building their partnership, engaging tribes, designing their project portfolio, maybe doing their landscape assessment. Other groups potentially are a little bit further along and have identified specific projects, but really don't have that full comprehensive portfolio yet. And our high capacity collaborative groups are certainly, ready to work at a landscape scale. Our goal with our programs is to really meet our partners where they are. So we do have funding programs or different ways of supporting our partners wherever they are on that spectrum of readiness, with the goal of really moving everyone towards a place where, they're thinking strategically at a landscape scale. But we recognize that that takes time and that there's critical work that can be done now in one-off projects, or again, building that capacity is something that's an ongoing endeavor that we intend to continue to support through the Conservancy. Next slide. Oh, and I think that's it. So I don't know if there's questions now or after the next presentation, but thank you all. And there's my email and phone number if anyone wants to reach out.
Thank you, Sarah. That was an excellent illustration of the concepts and the action plan being put into life. We will hold Q&A for Sarah until after we hear from our next speaker, who is Whitney Brennan with the California Tahoe Conservancy. Whitney is the Landscape Resilience Program Supervisor and is going to share a bit about how the Tahoe Conservancy is working with partners to advance wildfire resilience in the Lake Tahoe Basin. Turn it over to you, Whitney.
Thank you for the introduction. Yes, I'm going to talk about wildfire resilience in the Lake Tahoe Basin. Next slide, please. So I wanted to share a little bit about my agency, the California Tahoe Conservancy. We're a state agency, just like the Sierra Nevada Conservancy, but we're at a very different scale. We only have jurisdiction over the California side of the Tahoe Basin, the light blue color in this map. So very different scale than where the Sierra Nevada Conservancy is working at. We also are unique that we own and manage nearly 4,700 parcels of land, which totals about 6,500 acres on the California side of the Tahoe Basin. Next slide. So I think this was mentioned earlier that obviously one of our big issues, wildfire is a huge threat statewide, and similarly in the Lake Tahoe Basin, and climate change has increased the risk and severity and frequency of wildfires. We also have some unique issues in the Tahoe Basin where, for example, government agencies actually own properties inside subdivisions. So there might be an open space parcel between two homes within a neighborhood. And this is unique. There isn't really a statewide model for this. So agencies in the basin that have these parcels in subdivisions are having to figure out how to work and implement things on those locations. In addition, there's a wide variety of agencies that are involved in wildfire resilience in the basin, both landowners and regulators. And so both these items make work in Tahoe more challenging. And in order to succeed, we have to work collaboratively. Next slide. So the Tahoe Conservancy organizes its work with basin partners through the Tahoe Fire and Fuels Team, which is known as TFFT. You can see there's a wide variety of partners, as you can see here in this picture and in these emblems. It's a partnership that was formed after the 2007 Angora fire, consists of 21 land managers, fire agencies, regulators, and the Washoe Tribe of Nevada and California. In addition to this larger TFFT collaboration, the Conservancy and other TFFT partners also regularly work with local jurisdictions, including counties, cities, and public utility districts. This includes funding implementation on local jurisdiction properties and also helping to bring those into Conservancy projects as well. The TFFT collaborates to identify priorities for wildfire risk reduction, including implementing treatments and coordinating funding. And all the work the TFFT does is advancing the TFFT-developed Lake Tahoe Basin Forest Action Plan, which is our local regional action plan, and of course, the Task Force Action Plan. Next slide. We're also part of foundational work of larger landscape collaborative efforts, including Lake Tahoe West and Tahoe Central Sierra Initiative. As you can see on the left, Lake Tahoe West is a 59,000-acre all-lands multi-agency restoration effort on the west shore of Lake Tahoe. And the Tahoe Central Sierra Initiative on the right is a state, federal, and nonprofit partnership that is restoring landscape resilience on approximately 2.4 million acres. And in that case, we are partnering with Sierra Nevada Conservancy and other agencies as this covers many landowners and jurisdictions. Next slide. So the basin's work is contributing to these task force priorities and strategies and the actions in the draft action plan. Our work is benefiting landscape resilience by increasing the pace of treatments in high hazard landscapes. This is really because we've been receiving block grants and we're able to work collaboratively at all lands level. We're able to accelerate workforce and career development pathways, for example, funding the development of a forestry program at our local community college. We're also able to expand support for tribal stewardship by first developing a strong working relationship with the Washoe tribe and also being able to fund tribal capacity in the basin and help to fund a tribally led watershed restoration project on the west shore of the basin. Our work is also helping to benefit community wildfire preparedness. We're helping to fund fire-adapted community programs. We're strengthening community-wide preparedness by funding recently a new community wildfire protection plan for the Tahoe Basin, and we're focusing treatments around communities and critical infrastructure. And of course, our work is helping to mobilize regional action. We're improving regional planning by leading the development of a regional priority plan for the basin. So we're able to fund capacity building and the creation of prioritization tools that both help prepare us for implementation. We've also been taking advantage of the secretarial suspension as a mechanism for environmental compliance when appropriate. And we've been expanding implementation partnerships and continuing our cross-jurisdictional work by using things such as our current Good Neighbor Authority that we have with the Lake Tahoe Basin Management Unit, where we're able to treat their lands that are adjacent to our lands all as part of one project. Next slide. So the Conservancy is able to do all of these actions in the basin with our partners by leveraging funding from both this Department of Conservation, Regional Forest and Fire Capacity Program, which is allowing us to build capacity regionally, and pairing that with other state and federal funding. And combining this funding together, we're able to provide multi-year funding for regional programs of work in the basin. And this helps us to weave together disparate pieces, things we might not usually be able to fund, to catalyze project development. We're able to fund unique things like tribal stewardship, planning and implementation, funding capacity building, outreach, and planning that's leading to a pipeline of projects. And we're also able to keep funding organizational capacity at key local and regional agencies that help keep this work moving along. One great example is the Tahoe Conservancy is funding through several grants, a fire protection district, a city fire rescue, and a resource conservation district. They're working together as a team to advance several local and regional basin projects to improve forest health and reduce wildfire risk, including hiring a registered professional forester to support project planning on the California side of the basin. And we're really excited about the momentum that's coming from our current DOC-funded capacity building grants, because what's come out of this capacity and planning efforts is shovel-ready projects. And now we're able to issue a Prop 4 funded implementation grant in South Lake Tahoe to do fuels reduction on local government and school district lands. Next slide. Looking forward, one of our key goals is to complete the regional priority plan for the Tahoe Basin. The TFFT partners have already initiated a 5-year plan with the goal of better aligning priorities, planning, implementation, and funding across partners. And this is the basis of the Tahoe RPP. This process will allow partners to be responsive to specific funding asks and requirements. And of course, we're going to continue advancing the goals of the task force and the draft action plan. We're going to keep planning and implementing fuels treatments on Conservancy lands and helping to fund and plan work on partner lands. We're going to keep coordinating with the Washoe tribe to support the tribe's engagement and capacity to participate in forestry projects on ancestral lands, including working with the Washoe Conservation Corps as a contracted implementer. We're going to continue to support local partners to build capacity and develop forest treatment projects on their lands. And of course, we're going to continue to seek multi-year funding that we can leverage along with our current Prop 4 funding so we can continue funding capacity building and outreach along with the planning and implementation of priority projects. So thank you for your time. I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Whitney and Sarah. That was a really excellent illustration, I think, of how you two working in state conservancies are collaborating with so many different entities in your region to advance these kinds of ambitious but very thoughtful landscape scale projects to restore forest health and advance wildfire resilience. So thank you so much for putting those together. And we do now have time to have questions for Whitney, Sarah, or Patrick about what you just heard about the regions or anything about the action plan or how those two intersect. So same as before, we can use the raise hand feature and the question and answer feature in the Zoom webinar. If and when you do put together your question in the Q&A or raise your hand, if you can specify who the question is for, that will also help us. There is a question coming in the chat directed toward Patrick, asking about whether the action plan includes specific targets for certain kinds of accomplishments.
Well, we did when we put together the 10-year plan. The estimates that we got from our modeling and other information suggested that if our focus is on the very high severity landscapes, together with dealing with our reforestation backlog, we're roughly at the million. It's roughly 1 million acres a year for 10 years. But of course, there's a lot of uncertainty in that number. It's not regionally specific where folks can really sort of hone in on the specific needs in their area. So it's a range. It's a range from roughly 850,000 to about 1.2 million acres per year. And so we're very careful to say that we're keeping the million acres annually target and not trying to get more definitive than that, because we want to bow to regional efforts to better plan, prioritize, and define the acreage numbers that make sense for them. So we have some rough estimates of what it's going to take, but we're not generally speaking of them as targets.
Thanks,
And there was
Patrick.
another question that's related, I saw in the chat, regarding various decision support tools. Many of you heard of Vibrant Planet, which has a tool. Forest Service is now rapidly moving towards using their own tool, which is called Planscape. In both cases, these tools allow you to input data on landscape conditions, fire conditions, and run projections that allow folks to better plan, prioritize, and report on the benefits of their projects. What we hope to be able to do is roll out these tools over the next several years to both community groups in CAL FIRE's case and landscape groups in the case of the Forest Service and the task force, so that folks do have that ability to look at area-wide bundles of projects and better estimate the benefits of those projects across the board. And just as important, to report later on the actual effectiveness of projects in reducing fire risk, improving forest health, et cetera. So more to come on that.
Thanks, Patrick. I'm also thinking it could be great to hear, we had this question earlier about a success story in the Sierra. Sarah shared a little bit about some of the projects primarily in Forest Service land that have been successful. But I'm curious to hear either from Whitney or Patrick, another success story, or particularly this part of the question that says, why are these stories success stories, and what are the takeaways to perhaps duplicate it elsewhere? So open floor to either Whitney or Sarah or Patrick, Sierra success stories and how we can get more of them.
Well, I would say generally, and certainly Sarah can speak more eloquently about Sierra Nevada, but I think we have a growing network of forest and landscape collaboratives across the state that share a common vision. And often it takes it takes a lead group to help pull folks together. You've heard about a couple of great examples in Tahoe, both Lake Tahoe West and the larger drawing a blank on the name now, the Tahoe Sierra Initiative. And I think a big key to them has been having the capacity building funding that has flowed through the Regional Forest and Fire Capacity Program. I've been at this game now for a couple of decades, and all of our funding for natural resources, as most of you know, doesn't come from the general fund. It comes from various bond acts, and typically bond acts are restricted to capital projects. And so the rule is we've relied on local and regional agencies to do all the planning work. That then puts them in a position to be eligible for bond money for implementation. The RFFC program is really the first program, I think, in the state's history where more than $100 million has been available solely for capacity building. And that's really been a game changer, not just in the Sierra, throughout the state, to finally give some local and regional agencies the capacity that they need so that all the grant money doesn't just fund to the more sophisticated groups that have more money than others. So hopefully we'll be able to maintain that program. And in fact, over time, what we'd really like to do is move away completely from competitive grants to collaboratives that have to compete against each other to actually have block grant funding to every part of the state. That's really the wave of the future. Unfortunately, I'd be the first to say it's not the way the state's budget works. It certainly works that way for the regional air and water boards, as many of you know. But for natural resources, we've never been in a position to give each part of the state the funding they need to address their issues. But hopefully, the task force work and the work of the Sierra Nevada Conservancy with developing its network is going to point us in that direction over time.
Great. Thanks, Patrick. Anything to add, Sarah or Whitney?
Yeah, I can jump in. I think successes sometimes are something as fine scale as groups finally getting in a room together and coordinating on a fuel break across jurisdictions, figuring out how to connect, maybe a private land block to Forest Service fuel breaks and to make it infinitely more effective, to something as big as I think about in the east side, there's something called the Eastern Sierra Community something protection project. Apologies to my Eastern Sierra colleagues. But also known as the Mammoth Donut. And this is a story that's played out across the Sierra, which is as the Forest Service has really struggled with capacity and diminished funds, we have these NGO and partners step in and really build a close relationship with those land managers. And then those NGOs can go out and get grant funding, can get state funding, can bring in additional capacity, can hire folks often more quickly than government agencies can, and then can implement or start designing projects. And in this case, it's a really comprehensive landscape project designed to both improve forest health around the town of Mammoth and to protect that community. And it was done in partnership with local land management agencies, with the city of Mammoth, NGOs, the Forest Service. So those are types of success stories. And in terms of lessons learned, none of them look exactly alike. It's like, I always say, it's like a happy marriage. There's not an exact recipe for it. I think a lot of it depends on your local players and partnerships, but it is beginning to actually come together. Think about the landscape that you all feel connected to, work with your land management agency. These Forest Service units have 5-year programs of work that they've developed or developing, and that's often an excellent place to start, especially in the Sierra where the Forest Service is the major landowner. And sorry, Maddie, if I could just jump in, there's a question that I saw I just want to address about holes in the map. And I just want to note that the map that I showed really only showed the investment ready landscapes, but there's another map. I think there was a link in the chat to the Regional Priority Plan Explorer on the Sierra Nevada website. What that is it shows all the collaborative groups, not just those investment ready landscapes. And there's a whole bunch more that are almost ready, really still developing those project portfolios, are still building that capacity, but really within a year or two should be ready for those landscape scale grants. And in some areas, maybe it's lower capacity, but we are continuing to support organizations and our federal land management partners on the ground there to get projects done at scale and direct funding through our different grant programs to fund those urgent one-off projects that are still really critical for resilience, but, aren't necessarily part of this larger collaborative vision.
Thank you, Sarah, and thanks for directing people to where they can learn more about the collaboratives in the region. A couple more minutes for questions here. I am seeing some in the Q&A. There's a question that I think could be directed at Patrick, but if others have insights as well, thoughts about improving the visibility of mitigation projects to insurers and the role of data in that. Huge question, but if there's anything, Patrick, in the action plan that you might direct people to, or thoughts you have on that.
Yeah, that's really an issue that CAL FIRE is really starting to focus on. We've got a lot of marvelous tools on the landscape side where we can assess the health of every parcel in the state down to 3 meters. We're not quite there yet on the community side. There's still a lot of work being done to model structure to structure fire. There's also a data gap. We don't know as a state which homeowners are doing defensible space and which ones might be doing home hardening. One resident might have one insurance company and his neighbor may have another one. So there's a big effort underway to see if we can cut through all that and get a lot better data, homeowner to homeowner, neighborhood to neighborhood, in a way that we can make a more direct relationship between home mitigations and insurance rates. There have been some pilot projects, including one in Tahoe on the Nevada side, where a neighborhood as a whole got together and led by the Tahoe Fund and by a bunch of basin interest. And as a result of those improvements that they made, insurance company went in and did reduce their rates. Love to have that happen in the rest of the state, but it's a big job to replicate something like that statewide over tens of millions of properties. So we've got our work to do there, but there's a lot that's happening to try to better quantify work that's being done throughout the state to put us in a better position to translate improvements to reductions in insurance.
Thanks, Patrick. It does sound that we have probably time for 1 or 2 more questions. It sounds like we do have some raised hands. So Sky, I don't know if you want to select the next person to ask a question of our panelists and come off mute.
Yeah, the raised hand's lowered, but please go ahead and raise your hand again, or if anyone else has a question, and we will call on you. And I see one from Bill Jacks, so you should be able to talk now.
Hello, I'd like to talk about air pollution and fire being a critical, fundamental part of the ecosystem and an unavoidable part of the ecosystem, and specifically EPA, Cal EPA, and air quality designating prescribed fire smoke as a pollution and a nuisance to be avoided. How do we manage the landscape in perpetuity with frequent fire with these laws, regulations, and societal structures that have been designed against the fire-prone landscape?
Yeah, great question. We have a whole prescribed fire action plan that was developed a couple of years ago, where the prescribed fire practitioners got together with the air quality regulators to try to hit that balance between accelerating prescribed fire and protecting air quality. And that's been followed up by an executive order that was released this last year by the governor that further accelerates prescribed fire and gives us even more flexibility in working with air quality regulators to get there. It's a challenging issue because, as you suggested, the Clean Air Act was not set up to deal with prescribed fire. And so there's a lot of work being done to try to make sure we have as much flexibility as possible under the current rules to proceed with prescribed fire. So it's a work in progress, but as every year goes by, we're getting better and better at facilitating prescribed fire and working through windows and working through the air quality rules. I think it was fair to say that there was a lot of skepticism 5 years ago when we started in the air quality community and world about prescribed fire, and now they're some of our biggest champions because they recognize that we'd much rather have fire in small, low intensity doses than these large mega fires, but it sometimes takes a while for our regulatory processes to follow. So we're working at it, but certainly more needs to get done there.
Thanks for that question, and thanks, Patrick, for taking that on. We should move on to close things out on time and let folks know how they can communicate their feedback and additional questions they may have. So I'm sorry we did not get to every question in the chat. So to close out the webinar, we want to let you know that your feedback on the plan is welcomed during this 60-day partner review period that runs from now until August 7th. There's additional regional webinars going on this month for 3 other regions about the action plan. And if you visit the wildfiretaskforce.org website, you will find a link to access the web-based feedback form where your input can be accepted. There's also ongoing tribal consultation at this time. So like I said, the QR code there will take you to download the draft plan, and the final plan is expected to come out in the fall of this year. The task force has 2 more in-person meetings planned in 2026, one in Humboldt County in October and in Sacramento in December. And at wildfiretaskforce.org, you can access additional resources and updates. And as we close out, just want to offer a big thank you to all of our speakers today and to all of you for attending and for your thoughtful questions. So thank you all, and we will see you next time.